of Gateway. Gateway is a community-based, not-for-profit that aims to promote the health and quality of life of rural residents through research, education, and communication. One Health is a new concept that connects human health with that of animals and the environment. In rural communities, we have a rich connection with both nature and animals. There are many remarkable trails and parks that are found in rural communities, and we have examples of the Bruce Peninsula, Point Farms, and the Goderich to Guelph Trail. Rural areas are also massive sites of agriculture with farm animals and farmland operations that all connect to the idea of One Health. Before we begin, I want to acknowledge the land. The Gateway office resides on the traditional territory of the Anishinaabe, Haudenosaunee, and Neutral peoples. Under the dish of the One Spoon Wampum, these groups agreed to care for the land and its resources by the Great Lakes in peace. We would like to acknowledge the history of the traditional territory of the land, now known as rural Southern Ontario, and honour the long-standing relationships of the Indigenous peoples across the region. As we talk about animal, human, and environmental health, Indigenous groups have known this connection. Human activity through the settlement of North America has disrupted animals' environment, causing many ecosystems and species to be at risk. To help understand this issue, we have a mix of speakers, including Dr. Wayne Caldwell, Dr. Quinn Webber, Chris Lee, and Nathan Schoelier. Dr. Wayne Caldwell is Professor Emeritus in Rural Planning and Development at the University of Guelph. He's a former member of the Ontario Ministry of Municipal Affairs Greenbelt Council and has maintained a career-long affiliation with the Huron County Department of Planning and Development. He's published extensively in areas such as farmland protection, rural land issues, the environment, siting of livestock facilities, and community planning. He's also a skilled facilitator with a focus on managing change in rural and agricultural settings. Dr. Quinn Webber studies the causes and consequences of animal behavior within the context of species conservation. His research focuses on individual behavior variation and environmental variations plays in affecting fitness and disease outcomes for bats and caribou. His research group uses a range of contemporary statistical analyses to test competing hypotheses that span a broad range of ecological scales. The implication of our work are wide-ranging, and our goals are to use the One Health approach to contribute to the conservation and management of species at risk. Chris Lee has been a self-employed businessman since 1970. He's been involved with the Goderich to Guelph Rail Trail for a very long time. He's a past board of directors member, current advocate, and work volunteer. Nathan is the Stewardship, Lands and Education Manager at the Ausobel Bayfield Conservation. Through this role, he has the opportunity to work closely with landowners to make environmental improvements on their properties, foster appreciation through the experience by getting people outside on over 9,000 acres of conservation lands, and lead a dedicated team of educators. To thank those that are ongoing attendees, we offer certificates at the end of each semester to those with perfect attendance to recognize your commitment to and involvement with this educational series. Throughout the lecture, we encourage you to ask questions of the lecturer. Add your questions to the question and answer box, and they will be addressed. I'll hand it over to Wayne Caldwell.
Thank you very much, Roland. Trusting everyone can hear me just fine. Big thanks to Gateway for organizing this event and the continuing and ongoing series of lectures that they do over the lunch hour. I think that Gateway's willingness to tackle this topic is quite leading edge, actually, because I think it speaks to different ways of thinking about health and thinking about communities in that process. So thanks very much to Gateway for doing that. I'm going to share some screen here, so just let's make sure this is working all right. Everybody hopefully can see my slide deck. And at the outset, I just want to say that I'm going to be speaking to this topic from a rural and small town perspective, particularly with a focus on land use planning, which is, again, maybe on the margins of what we would think about when we think about One Health, but I think it's really quite critical to be thinking about the environmental and land use implications of the things that we do and how that contributes to our personal health and how it contributes to community health as well. And to demonstrate that, I'd like to begin with an initial story, and this takes me back to August of 2011. My wife and I were here on the farm, as you can see behind me, and there was a storm starting about, and it was thunder and some lightning, and clouds were out there, and it was kind of a weird colored sky and so on. And we didn't think about it a whole lot. There was some wind, and I should mention we live about near the little hamlet of Nile, about 7-8 kilometers from the town of Goderich. Storm went through, and shortly thereafter, our phone rings, and it's our daughter on the other end, and she says, "Are you okay? Are you okay?" And unbeknownst to us, sitting here at our home near Nile, a storm had rumbled through Goderich, but was actually a tornado. And out of that, there was much destruction. There was a loss of life, and just incredible devastation in a community context. The environmental implications to the community of that event were significant and changing forever. But to me, the story doesn't end there. The story in some ways begins with the discussions that went on within that municipality, within Goderich, and many of you on the line will be familiar with all of this, but the planning that went on to think about what does our community look like moving forward. And indeed, there were folks that said, some of the consultants, if you don't use this as an opportunity for making things better, you've lost an opportunity. And I think it was materialized for me with the parade of trees. And again, people on the line will be familiar with this, but it was a contribution of trees that were made by other municipalities, given the loss that had happened within Goderich. And I was unable to be here with the parade of trees, but you can see a sample there of a truck driving around the square, and there were multiple trucks with many trees on them, and people on the square in tears, just reflecting of what this meant for the rebirth of the community. And for me, this is thinking about One Health from an environmental and social context. How do we deal with those issues which are so fundamental to us? And how do we make progress and move forward in a positive and constructive way? And there's indeed, in my view, an environmental and social lens to that. So when we think about One Health, and this is borrowing from the University of Guelph's One Health Institute, some of the materials online, and we have a definition which is provided at the top of what One Health is. The collaborative efforts of multiple disciplines working together on our planet's most complex animal, human, and environmental health problems. And we think of the folks that are on the screen today, co-presenting with myself, you get a sense of that collaborative effort of multiple disciplines happening. And also just building on the definition, what I've highlighted in yellow there, it relates to the human, plant, and animal and environmental health are connected in more ways than we've imagined, and that the socioeconomic conditions are often pivotal in the extent of disruptions and recovery in the affected communities. And I think you'll hear more about that from the other speakers today as well. But it's a merger of these different perspectives in a way that hopefully deals with some of the challenges that we're facing with a broad perspective. So some of those perspectives are captured in this question. What are the key issues impacting rural communities? And I'll share some responses to that question that I've got from other audiences over the years. But you can see just some of the images that are on the screen. You can see examples of the built environment, bottom right corner from the town of Goderich. You can see farms and farmland, and how important the protection of farmland is in terms of protecting our ability to produce food. You can see the natural environment, you can see infrastructure as well. And when I posed this question in the past, I've got a really diverse set of responses to it. I'm not going to review all of those today, but some of the key issues which are present here is, of course, there's the more physical side of healthcare, accessing health and education, medical physicians and healthcare. But there's other things such as the loss of farmland, the impact of broad global events such as climate change. I don't have biodiversity here, I don't think, but the loss of biodiversity and how all of these things fit together. The conclusion would be that there are a range of issues confronting Ontario's rural communities, and how do we respond to those is our ongoing challenge and our ongoing question. And for me, it's important to think about the social determinants of health as part of this. And again, this will be a term that many folks are familiar with, but those things which we don't think of as the biology connected to ourselves, but the other things that determine our health within the communities within which we live. So accessing education and the quality of that education is important. And of course, healthcare, the services that are out there and the quality of them. I'm going to speak in a bit more detail about neighborhoods and built environment, but certainly what Chris talks about in terms of G2G fits into that for sure. The social and community context and the economic stability of the community within which we live all impact our health in one way or the other. And we've done work looking at healthy rural communities as an example, and this is a document that's available freely to people, but focusing on healthy rural communities. What is it that makes a community prosper and survive and create a context for quality health within that community? And I think that's quite important as we think about this topic. And for me, a key word in thinking about that is the concept of sustainability. And again, people will have heard that, but for me, I internalize that as meaning blending together the economic with the environmental, with the social, and of course, all of those things together contribute to making healthy rural communities. And I think, there's a very diverse and important perspectives thinking about those three ongoing terms, which we'll hear more about today. So again, the images are all there for a reason, but it's this notion of the connection of One Health to land use planning, my profession, which really focuses on the built environment. It focuses on natural heritage, and it focuses on agriculture. I'll talk about the built environment in more details, but simply to say, of course, agriculture, farmland preservation, the quality of food that we produce connected to that, and of course the natural heritage, and we're going to hear more about that as this more. I guess I may be referring to this morning, but this afternoon. It's been a long day already. But those things all fit together in a positive and constructive way. And particularly when we think about the built environment, the communities that we live in, whether you're on a farm as I am, or whether you're within the town of Goderich or the city of North Bay, all of those things fit together. And the built environment contributes to, in a positive way, to obesity, or I should say in a negative way, it can contribute to obesity, and in a positive way, it can contribute to that as well. Perfect example. For many years, I worked with the county planning department. I would drive from the farm here into Goderich. I would finish my day, I would get back in the car, and I would drive home. And there were probably days that the level of physical activity wasn't much greater than that. When I took on an appointment at the University of Guelph, for a number of years, we had a condo. My typical day was getting up in the morning, walking 35 minutes to the university, and walking home again 35 minutes. And that forced activity was and is really important in terms of thinking about how the built environment impacts our own activity. But there are many other things. Chronic diseases can be impacted by the built environment. More activity leads to better health. Interestingly, rural communities often have poorer health than urban communities. Impacts of climate change, air pollution, motor vehicle accidents, water quality, and so on. I won't go over all of those items, but it's to recognize that they are critically important. These resources, I'll simply say, are available to people. They cover a number of the topics that I've looked at. The Healthy Rural Communities Toolkit, attracting and retaining newcomers, which I think is important in terms of thinking about the social and economic health of communities, facilitating agriculture and local food, Rural Landowner Stewardship Guide, Huron County Active Transportation are all topics which in my mind are relevant. They're available on my website as referred to at the bottom of that slide, and invite folks to use them. So with that, I want to say thanks. I know there will be questions a little bit later. I'll look forward to participating in that discussion. And with this, I'm going to turn it over to Dr. Quinn Webber, who will now discuss the animal side of One Health. And we had a slight joke at the outset. I could refer to him as the Batman, which I won't do. I'll leave that to him. So over to you, Quinn.
Thanks, Wayne. Well, thank you. So I just wanted to start out by thanking Gateway Centre as well for the invitation to speak today. So as Wayne and others have mentioned, I'm going to be talking about bats and One Health. But before I start, I just wanted to introduce myself. I'm originally from Winnipeg, Manitoba, and I got my start working with bats in Manitoba. Following that, I did a PhD at Memorial University in Newfoundland, where I worked on caribou primarily. And since 2022, I've been an assistant professor in the integrative biology department here at the University of Guelph, where my lab studies the ecology, disease, and conservation of bats, caribou, coyotes, and wolves in both Ontario and Newfoundland. And so today I'm only really going to be talking about my bat work, but these are some of my other interests as well. And so, of course, I don't have the Batman slide as I introduce myself, but, there are many common misconceptions and stigmas associated with bats. And one of them, of course, is Batman. So no, we're not Batman. I'm not Batman. But we also have other sort of more negative associations with bats, right? So there's sort of this association with things that are dark or scary or Halloween. Vampire bats are a big one that always come up. And there's this common misconception that bats are really bad. And so part of my presentation today is going to sort of try and dispel some of those myths, but also sort of provide a cautious dose of a dose of caution when it comes to bats as well. So what is a bat? If we were all in person, I would sort of survey the room and ask what people thought. But since we're all online, I'll just sort of ask rhetorically, what is a bat? And as scientists, how do we actually classify bats? So this is a photo of a flying fox, which is a bat that lives, or a type of bat that lives throughout the tropics around the world. And bats are mammals, so perhaps many folks know this. They are animals with fur, and they provide milk for their babies. And these are the two characteristics of an animal that make them a mammal. So they're not so different from a cow or from us or from a dog. They have the same sort of main characteristics. But there is one really interesting difference. And again, if we were in person, I'd ask you what you think that difference is. But I think many people would say it's that they can fly, they have wings. And this is what makes them sort of different from other groups of mammals, like obviously ourselves, but also rodents and others. And so there is a common misconception that bats are sort of just flying rodents or flying rats. But in fact, from a sort of taxonomic perspective, they're actually not closely related to rodents at all. Bats are more closely related to primates, including us, than they are to bats. And so there is no sort of super close relationship there. And they're in their own group called Chiroptera, and Chiroptera means hand wing. So as we look at the picture of the bat's wing here, each of these long sort of bones that are here in the wing membrane, these are actually the fingers of the bat. And then this is the wrist bone. They have a very elongated wrist bone. And then this is the arm here. So bats are actually flying with their wings. And so the name of their group is hand wing. And so often when I give this presentation to children, I'll sort of ask them to imagine themselves flying with their hands, because that's what bats are doing. And I think this is one sort of way that we can sort of help think about bats in a different light and sort of try to understand a little bit more about them. And so from a sort of higher level conceptual perspective, one way that I think about bats is through a One Health lens. So Wayne did a pretty good job of defining One Health earlier, so I'm not going to get too much into it. But this is sort of a diagram or a visual diagram from an academic article that sort of highlights and introduces the One Health concept. And really all we need to know about is that One Health is sort of the integration of environment, animal, and human health. And sort of there's large amount of collaboration, communication, coordination, and capacity building across all sectors and disciplines throughout society. And really what we want in the end is sort of healthy ecosystems, healthy animals, healthy humans. And we want all of these components to be sort of living in harmony with one another. And when we think about sort of complex issues, when we take a One Health approach, we can take sort of different, seemingly disparate ideas and try and bring them together. And so that's what we do when we think about One Health. And in my lab and in my research group, we think a lot about disease and the ecology of disease. And so this is an image from a New York Times article published back in 2012. But there's a quote from this article that I really like. And the quote is, disease, as it turns out, is largely an environmental issue. 60% of emerging infectious diseases that affect humans are zoonotic, which means they originate in animals. And more than 2/3 of those originate in wildlife. So in this quote from the New York Times, we basically have a One Health statement here. We're talking about environmental issues. We're talking about zoonotic diseases, which are diseases that transfer from animals to humans. We're talking about wildlife, and we're talking about sort of the impact on humans. And in this image, which is associated with the article, bats play a really central role here. They're sort of the top animal that we see in this picture. And bats are really important when we think about zoonotic diseases. You've probably heard of their association with the virus that causes COVID-19, and they are host to a wide number of viruses and other parasites and pathogens, which I'm going to talk about in a minute. But I want to tell you a little bit more about bats and sort of some of the things that we know about bats that sort of make them a good candidate to think about from a One Health perspective. So the first one is that bats are extremely diverse. There's over 1,500 species worldwide. And so to put this in perspective, there are just over 2,000 rodent species. There's maybe 200 or 300 primate species. So bats are really among the most diverse groups of mammals in the world. They live in almost every habitat except the far northern Arctic and the Antarctic. So basically, if there's a tree, there will be bat species. And so these are some sort of candidates for some of the silliest and most interesting looking species of bats. Right here on the left, we have, I don't actually know the name of the species, but they have these suction cups on their elbows and ankles, so they can climb up these fern leaves in the tropics. This is the vampire bat here, which is a common bat in Central America, and sort of to dispel the myth that vampire bats sort of will go after humans to consume a blood meal, they actually don't. They typically will, what they do is they sort of, similar to a mosquito, they will find a host. In the case of vampire bats, it's usually a cow or a goat or something that doesn't really move very far or fast. And they will, similar to a mosquito, pierce the skin and actually drink the blood, lap up the blood like a dog or a cat would from a bowl. But their primary host for their sort of blood meal would be a large mammal like a cow. And these are species that only live in Central America, and there's really not much risk to humans, I would say. The other species here that we see are large fruit-eating bats that live throughout the tropics. So these are species that are eating avocados or mangoes or other sort of juicy, ripe fruits. And here in Ontario, we don't have any of these sort of interesting exotic species. We have 8 species of bats in Ontario. They all kind of look the same. They all sort of have similar names. We've got the northern long-eared bat here, the little brown bat, big brown bat. This yellow guy is the tricolored bat. Up in the top corner here is the eastern small-footed bat. And we have silver-haired bats, red bats, and hoary bats. And so these 3 in the bottom right here are migratory species. The other 5 are hibernating species, which means that they live in Ontario year-round. They hibernate in caves or mines typically throughout the winter. And then they would spend the summer living in trees or more likely in barns or bat boxes or other sort of human-built structures. And so this is where bats and One Health kind of really comes into play, is because we have all interacted with bats in our day-to-day life. So many of you, I think, are likely living rurally or on farms or in small towns. And I would guess, if I could see a show of hands, nearly all of you have probably interacted with a bat at some point in your life. And that's because these species, notably the big brown bat and little brown bat here, they live in barns, they live in bat boxes, they live in people's attics. And the reason for that is because those are places that are really warm. If you imagine the roof, the underside of the roof of your barn, it's probably getting up to like 30 degrees Celsius on a warm, sunny day. And that's exactly the temperature that these bats need to raise their pups and live their life in the summer. And so from an environmental perspective, just kind of like what Wayne was talking about, the built environment is really a good home for these bats. And there are lots of reasons why we might not want them in our structures, but there are some reasons why we may actually want them to be there. And one of those is that bats are actually extremely interesting from a life history perspective. They're more similar to a grizzly bear than they are to a mouse, even though they're similar in size to a mouse. So a grizzly bear gives birth to 1 baby maybe every other year. A bat is the same. They give birth to 1 baby a year or every other year, whereas a mouse is giving birth to potentially dozens of babies every year, and they may only live for a single year. And bats, like grizzly bears and other large mammals, are living to be 20, 30, 40 years old in the wild. So this bat that we see here has the blue band on its right wing and a silver one here on its left wing. This animal was 28 years old. These bands, had been on this bat for 28 years when it was discovered in a cave. So in the wild, they can live for an extremely long time. So when a bat dies, it's a really big deal because that's one animal that's been removed from a population, and it takes a long time to replace them. And so when we think about bats on the landscape, they often are all over the place. And historically, they have been. They're really good urban adapters. As I've said, they tend to live in places that we live. But as sort of contemporary modernization of various different sort of forms has happened over time, we've seen a lot of threats to bats. And so this includes things like deforestation. So bats historically have lived in forests. So if you cut down a forest, you are harming and removing bat habitat. But also wind turbines can cause mortality in bats. And so there's a big push in Ontario. And I think this is sort of older news now, but it's quite a big topic in the bat research world. There's a big push to sort of slow down turbines at certain times of year, like the migratory seasons, to reduce bat mortality. And then perhaps most importantly is the threat of disease. So bats are host to a fungal pathogen called white nose syndrome, which about 15 years ago caused large die-offs of bat species throughout Eastern North America. And so while the die-offs have sort of plateaued and populations seem to be recovering, this is still a threat. And in combination with these other factors, these other environmental factors, bat populations are still sort of being hurt from the combination of these factors. And ultimately, why all of this is important and their connection to humans is that bats are actually worth billions of dollars from an agricultural perspective. There have been a number of studies from the US, from the Midwest in the States, that show that bats are eating massive, massive numbers of agricultural pests. So these studies will essentially quantify the economic importance of bats and the role that they play in consuming agricultural pests and insects. And it's really important in Ontario because all of our bat species are insectivores, which means that they eat insects. And so they're out there every night eating insects over top of farm fields. And this is a huge impact that we don't necessarily know about. So from a human health perspective, bats actually play this really important role. And then sort of the last thing I want to kind of cover before I wrap up is the role of bats from a sort of zoonotic disease perspective. And I'm only going to talk about rabies because that's sort of the most relevant pathogen from a Canadian perspective. So rabies is a disease of the nervous system. Many people die from rabies every year, but most of these are in the global south, in countries in Africa and Asia. In Canada, bats are actually the fourth most common host of rabies. They're not the most common. So foxes, raccoons, and skunks tend to have rabies more than bats. And bats will die from rabies. So if they have it, they will eventually die themselves. And the number of rabies deaths in Canada is extremely low. So only 10 since 1970. Sadly, there was one, as many folks are probably aware, there was one death last year in Ontario. I'm not going to get into the details of it, but obviously it is a risk, but the risk is extremely low. And this is sort of the public service announcement that I always have for folks when I speak to public audiences or I talk to members of the public, is if you do find a bat in your home or your garage or your shed or barn, try to let it get out on its own. And if you absolutely do have to move it, try and catch it with a towel and make sure you're wearing leather gloves, as you do not want to come in direct contact with the bat at any time. Even though rabies is the prevalence of rabies is very low, the risk is very high if you were to get it. I'm running a bit behind, so I'll just sort of quickly wrap up here with some discussion of the work that I do in Ontario. Right now, most of my research and the students working on bats are studying bats that live in bat boxes. So these are some examples of bat boxes that we've seen on different properties. These are all up on Manitoulin Island, so a bit north of where most of you folks are. And we're interested in studying the sort of movement and diet of bats in this area. So we'll capture bats at roosts. This is called a harp trap, where we catch bats coming out. We tag them and track them and collect fecal samples to figure out what they're eating and whether or not they're hosting any parasites or pathogens. And we sort of try and link all of this back to the habitat that they're using and provide commentary on the conservation of this endangered species. So briefly, just to wrap up, I know it's a very short window to talk about it, but bats are a very important species in the ecosystem that we live in. And there are many, many important One Health linkages between bats, the environment, and humans. So with that, I will stop and I will be passing it over to Chris Lee.
Yes, I am the G2G Rail Trail guy, and an opportunity here to talk about how the trail contributes to the health of our community. Very unique asset within our community. For those that don't know, I'm going to just share a map here. There we go. So the rail trail is a legacy of the original railway that was built from Goderich to Guelph back in the early 1900s and was decommissioned in the late 1990s and was used in sort of odd places. Portions were allocated to hiking clubs and trail groups and used in sections. And the sort of breakthrough a little over 10 years ago with the G2G concept was that it would.
If you actually, so we're seeing slide 6 of your slideshow, so we're not actually seeing the beginning. If you want to scroll to the beginning.
So the breakthrough with the rail trail was that, or the G2G concept was that we would stitch together all the unused portions of the trail and have a continuous trail, from the lakefront through to Guelph. And that has been our ongoing goal, and it's almost complete with the exception of a few of the bridges that were decommissioned back in the 1990s. One of which will be replaced next year, which will leave only 2 more to look after. What's unique about rail trails? Well, I'm sorry, excuse me. My point was the trail is 132 kilometers in length, completed. It's 1,000 acres of property. It's owned by the province of Ontario, which makes it quite unique in that the province acquired this when it was decommissioned, and that assured that we would have a contiguous space where a lot of these get broken up. This one didn't. And originally the province acquired it to put in a water pipeline. That was their intention, but that was they were unable to do that due to the Great Lakes Water Treaty, which prohibited taking water from one watershed and releasing it into another. So the province retained the property for future use and assigned it, designated it as hiking and non-motorized recreation. So cycling, hiking, that type of thing. The G2G concept is actually an oversight body. It's a nonprofit charitable organization run by volunteers. And really what we do is coordinate a coalition of communities up and down the trail. So the communities consist of, well, right from the top down. We sometimes coordinate federal programs, provincial programs. Some of the portions of the trail were held by things like the Region of Waterloo. And we've coordinated projects with all of the counties involved, Wellington, Perth, and Huron, as well as the lower tier municipalities. They are all, there's, as I say, 132 kilometers of the trail. So we cut through something like 14 different municipal organizations. So the role of G2G Inc. and the volunteers running it is to coordinate all that. We also pull in a lot of service groups, Rotary Club, Lions, Optimists, as well as special interest groups like the Guelph Hiking Club, Kissing Bridge Trail Association, Maitland Trail Association, and the like. So one of the challenges of the organization is just the diversity and the number of interested parties in the trail that makes the management of it a challenge. So we've broken it into sections. The counties primarily are the dividing lines. So the Lake Huron route is the first, 55 kilometers in length, and then Perth County Harvest Trail, and the Kissing Bridge Trail is the final section. It takes us down into Guelph, and then there's a section where we're developing the route through the city of Guelph. And we have trail advisory committees that provide oversight to all of that. So that's kind of the nature of it. So the thing that makes rail trails in particular unique is first, they're flat. I remember county engineer, when I was talking to him about it one time, he said, every time I look at it, he says, I just see a roadbed waiting to be paved. And that literally is what the railway right-of-way provides, is a established roadbed. So it's flat, which means that it's accessible. It also provides entry-level activity. Once you sort of look after the accessibility pieces, you're ensuring that there's entry-level activity just to get people engaged and and active at the most simple levels. And whether it's walking 100 meters or riding a bike for 100 kilometers, the trail can accommodate that and accommodate their people's progression as they move from walking 100 meters, if that's all they can do. We have examples of people doing the trail with walkers and mobility devices and that type of thing. The other unique part of rail trails is that they're very low carbon, very low maintenance, and low capital because the work was essentially done. To recreate this trail now today would be darn near impossible, and certainly out of reach in terms of the capital required. So the amounts required to reestablish, restore the bridge crossings and things, relatively achievable, certainly achievable, relatively low. The things that we've really learned in doing the trail and working with the trail over the last 10 years, really, and particularly since 2020, when we finished the surfacing from end to end, is that the piece that it brings to the community and the door that it opens is through accessibility and inclusivity. We always knew that was part of the appeal of the trail, but nonetheless, you always kind of visualized, cyclists in spandex, with expensive gravel bikes pumping down the trail. In actual fact, what you find are moms with baby carriages and people with mobility devices and that type of thing out on the trail. So that has been a real revelation, that the real demand comes from that portion of the population. And there's social benefits to that. I mean, it essentially is filling a gap. The fact that these people show up and then the volume that they do indicates that there's a need for safe places, for safe space in our community. There is no marketing budget for G2G. There's no, in fact, because of the nature of the organization and the lease that we hold with the province, we do not market. I mean, people show up because they hear about it, because they're looking for somewhere like this. So we've recently had some access to some usage data, and the numbers have been really quite startling. It's generated from a company called Propulso, and what they do is they track the cell phone pings. So if you're on the trail with a cell phone, they can, there's a ping established of you coming within the boundaries of the trail and where you leave it. So we can figure out from that how many people are showing up, how much of it they're doing, how frequently they come, where they get on and where they get off, and all that type of thing. But the core bit of really startling information was our first set of data has been for 2023. We're still waiting on 2024, unfortunately, but for 2023, we had well over 700,000 unique visits to the trail. Pretty amazing number in any circumstance for something that's not marketed, that simply, people just showed up in those kinds of numbers, indicates that, the need within the community and the value that is being offered to, community recreation and health. Okay, I think I've actually hit the only thing I would add at the end of all this is the other value of the trail is the connectivity aspect of it. We are part of the Trans-Canada Trail, so you literally can go from Goderich, turn left at Guelph, and go to Victoria Island if you so choose, or you turn right and go to St. John's. We are intersect with the Great Lakes Waterfront Trail. That's 3,600 kilometers. And of course, there's all the legacy connections along, because it was a railway. Those connections that were established while it was a railway are still there. So every level crossing, every little village is a potential access point to the trail or from the trail. And finally, it also connects to the GO Transit system at the transportation hub in Guelph. So in fact, the sort of the reach of the GO Transit system is about 7 million people who quite literally do get on the transit system. I've had people on at Oakville, within sight of Lake Ontario, have their breakfast, get on the GO Transit system, get off in Guelph, and end up having supper in Goderich on the beach, the Beach Reach Station. So tremendous reach and connectivity is a key aspect. So this service, in terms of what the trail offers, it reaches broadly and it reaches widely and to a diverse population. So I'll hand off now to Nathan and look forward to any questions.
Unmute there. Thank you very much, Chris. It's fantastic work that you guys are doing up there. 700,000 people is quite an accomplishment for one year. Unique visits there. Thanks earlier for the introduction, Roland, and the opportunity to speak here to Gateway. As Roland mentioned, I'm a Stewardship, Lands, and Education Manager at the Sauble Bayfield Conservation Authority. The Sauble Bayfield Conservation Authority is a relatively small conservation authority, one of 36 in Ontario. We're located on the southeastern shores of Lake Huron. Our shoreline front goes from about Port Franks to Bayfield, and our headwaters go east of there, including both the Sauble and the Bayfield rivers, which make us a unique conservation authority in that sense. I'm going to spend some time today speaking to the Huron Clean Water Project, but before I do that, just a couple of the facets of the roles that I have. You can imagine in the role that I have with the stewardship, the lands, and the education umbrellas that I have the opportunity to work under, how that all relates to the One Health. You've got the lands, and there's lots of the conservation, the wildlife, the environmental benefits to there, but then you also have the opportunity to put people on the lands, and so we can start to foster environmental appreciation by providing that experience. We have the stewardship type of work, and so we get to then work with those people that maybe have seen things on the lands or through their neighbors to make environmental improvements on their own properties. And so that's really where some of our granting partners like Huron County through the Clean Water Program comes in place to support that type of work as well. But just before I move into the Clean Water Project, one of the things that I always find very exciting and I think is really related to this topic is when I have the opportunity to be invited to the table to discuss subdivision planning agreements. And so I'm invited through my lands hat. And we have the opportunity to then talk with developers, planners, and how conservation authorities can be a partner to protect the green spaces that are there. They're often riparian zones, water courses, and so we're protecting those wildlife corridors. We're protecting those sensitive riparian areas for water quality, but then we can also discuss trails and have that social aspect there. And so it's one of the really cool aspects of my job when the opportunity comes up. I'm always excited to have those conversations. And I'm just going to share one slide here, and it's just some of the stats from the end of 2024 from the Huron Clean Water Project. So the Huron Clean Water Project is a cost share funding initiative. 2024 was quite a milestone in the project. We not only crossed the 4,000 completed project milestone, but we also celebrated our 20th anniversary of the project. And so the Huron Clean Water Project has been funded by the county since 2004. It's delivered by ourselves and then our neighboring conservation authority, Maitland Valley Conservation. And so with that, it provides a real boots on the ground type approach because we're not, it's not being delivered through a point person, it's being delivered through teams of both conservation authorities. That includes ecologists, biologists, foresters, agricultural specialists. And so we're really able to work on a big picture with landowners on improvement projects for those properties, and those projects they complete on their properties have cumulative benefits that expand beyond the boundaries of their properties and really starts to make an environmental improvement across the county. And so you can see here some of the stats that we've had. So over 4,000 projects, over 800,000 trees, 50,000 acres of cover crops. But in my mind, some of the most exciting stats that we have in relation to the program is that it's not only been in Huron County. It's served as a model for several other counties. It seems more and more recently we're getting inquiries from counties, either both locally and as far as way as Ottawa, who are inquiring about the program, how it was developed, how they could do something similar. And so that's really exciting that when the success is able to be replicated across the province. And one of the other aspects of this is the top two lines that we have on there. The $4.7 million investment from Huron County with a $16.6 million project value. And so that really pulls together the economic piece into the environmental piece and supporting our landowners. It's a significant local investment by the county, but it supports local action, and a lot of times that local action is completed by contractors, which is where we get that larger total project value. And so it's really a strong investment of Huron County. It's almost a 4-to-1 investment that they've made to support this work across their county, and really the results speak for themselves when we look at those slides. Through the program, we're able to work really hand in hand with landowners. And a lot of times the landowner might have a really specific thing they're looking to accomplish on those properties, but there's a lot of benefits that go beyond one goal that they're looking to complete. Those can often be social, environmental, and otherwise. And a lot of times they will support agricultural practices as well. So it really brings things full circle. And we've even had a couple of really, really exciting properties where we've worked with people and developed a really good relation over times, and they've gotten towards the latter part of their career, and they're starting to decide, what am I going to do with my property? And we've been able to work with them through our land trust, our sister organization, to conserve some of these lands. And then we're able to really pull this really full circle when we have this public investment through the county that ends up in some sort of public hands and trails, and the opportunity for the community to enjoy these properties. So it really is a unique, exciting, and rewarding role, and it's really thanks to Huron County for their investment that they make in this program, and make for their landowners across the county. And that is all I have today, so I can save some time for questions.
Roland, you're currently muted.
I'm not now. I'd like to thank all our panelists. I think, the topics really knitted nicely together. And having heard everybody's presentation, I just want to offer each one of you an opportunity just to make a sort of last one comment before we wrap up. I'll start with Wayne.
Thanks very much. It was fascinating listening to the other presenters as well. So thanks for allowing me to be part of this panel. I just very briefly to say, for me, it's the relationships between the environment, between animal health, between human health, between the built environment, all of those things which come together that contribute to a perspective on this topic that I think is really helpful. And I think as a society, we need to think about things more broadly than instead of looking at things in silos. So again, thanks for that. I will add, I realize that there may not be time for questions. I'm happy to receive emails from folks if there are any questions, and they may have to be directed through Gateway to get to me, but happy to respond to any questions anyone might have. So thanks.
Thanks, Wayne. Quinn.
Yeah, I'll echo Wayne's comments. When we think about complex issues, whether they're sort of related to conservation, economics, health of any sort, I think thinking about them from a One Health perspective is a really powerful way to do so. And I think it's great that the Gateway Center is sort of interested in this approach. I'm really sort of happy to hear it. And here at the University of Guelph, we have a very strong One Health research and teaching focus. And so I'll add also that we have a new bachelor's of One Health program and graduate work in One Health as well. So there's a whole new generation of students who are coming up thinking about these things in sort of a way that historically has not been done. So I'll just add that. And I'll just leave my email in the chat here if anyone has any questions for me. I'm happy to answer questions by email or phone. Even my office number is on the University of Guelph website. So I'll leave it there. Thanks.
And
Quinn.
I'll put my email address there too. Good suggestion, Quinn.
Good idea. Chris. You muted, Chris. Chris, you're muted.
trying to present, about the trail at different times over the years, two things have come up, reoccur to me. One is that, we can't separate, if we're talking about the prosperity of our communities. As Wayne said, it's a holistic thing. It's our ecosystems, it's our built infrastructure and all kinds of things. And we've gone to great lengths to separate these things to the extent that we can. But I think we're coming back to being more holistic and the approach and seeing the value and the interaction of all these things. And I would also wanted to, if I didn't make the point in my presentation, come back to the issue of accessibility in our communities. Again, that's a very difficult thing to communicate effectively, because for everyone's first impression when I say accessibility is sort of like hitting the button beside the door, to gain access. Accessibility helps everybody, and it is the little things that we do in terms of building our infrastructure and how we operate it. And it isn't just the people who have obvious mobility issues. It's everyone at some point in their lives that we accommodate. And that's one of the things we discovered with the trail, that was the benefit in the audience. So.
Thanks, Chris. Amazing. Nathan, before you comment, there is a question on the Q&A board about liquid manure storage. I think you said some have been decommissioned, and the question is this due to farmers changing their practices, or what was the driver for that decommissioning?
Yes, a lot of times it is due to a changing agricultural practice.
So I know source water protection and the Walkerton event, that led to a lot of changes in liquid manure spreading. Is that still ongoing?
In terms of the Huron Clean Water Project, it certainly influenced some of the projects that we do support. Most notably are going to be your manure storage decommissionings, but as well as your wellhead protection and well decommissioning projects. And so it has had an influence in there, and it's great that there's the support available for people and the technical resources in order to do that type of work and make those changes on their properties, opposed to it just being something that's kind of forgotten about a lot of times behind the shed, behind the barn. And so we're able to, with the support, have some outreach with those people and provide the support and the connections through contractors in order to pull those things off the landscape and get rid of that conduit to our groundwater resources.
Okay. A lot of people mentioning how productive this session has been. I think I'd like to thank, in closing comments, thank all our presenters, Dr. Wayne Caldwell, Dr. Quinn Webber, Chris Lee, and Nathan Schoelier. I think, we've done a lot of good here. We've actually certainly brought together all these different notions and ideas, and One Health, under one banner. We do have to be asking questions about what type of topics people would like to see. It's there now. Encounter next year. Give us some ideas about what we can actually provide lectures on. What would your ideal topic be? I'd also like to thank, we got sponsors, but without sponsors, this wouldn't happen. It wouldn't be possible. And these include McGee Motors in Goderich, Hurontel, Lighthouse Money Management in Goderich, DeJager, Town Square IDA Pharmacy in Goderich, and Zehrs in Goderich, CIBC Wealth Management, Libro Credit Union, and Tuckersmith Communications. Gateway is a not-for-profit organization with charitable status, and we so appreciate and welcome any support we receive.